Right, I'm delighted to be here with the wonderful Rachel Elnaugh, soulpreneur, entrepreneur. I mean, there's so many adjectives, and you've lived a fascinating life. And I'm delighted to be here. We're in the heart of London. We're in Mayfair, which is quite apt because we're talking about money. And I've said this several times, but one of the very first times I heard you speak, you were speaking about your book, Business Nightmares. And I've never heard anybody really talk about, everyone's talking about how things go well in business.
Yes.
Very few people also talk about the other side, about business. And business has got a lot to do with people wanting to make money and so on. You've been there, you've done that, you've made money, you've lost money, you've helped people nowadays develop often a better relationship to money.
Yeah.
So I'm just so excited about talking to you today. It's interesting times for those people who are watching this. It's the new financial year when we're filming this. There have been lots of pension changes here in the UK financially. And just money is usually a thing on so many people's lips. Some people have got a really good relationship, some people have got a really bad relationship to it. And I know that you've helped lots of people really to get over all sorts of difficulties that they have relationships with money. So I just wonder, from your point of view, what does money mean to you, Rachel? What does money mean to you?
Oh, to me, money is just energy, really, and it's just about this kind of exchange of flow of giving great value and receiving value back. And so I'm a great believer in that sort of idea of giving great service and being in a place to receive. But my observation is that most people tend to break that flow.
Right.
And often subconsciously, because they aren't very good at receiving, or they are trying to take without really getting the idea of that it's all about giving, and giving great service.
You know, and
so
that
there's
makes
a lot of mental hang-ups, which...
That makes so much sense, because I was just thinking, and as before the interview, I was just thinking a little bit about you and the bits I know about the journey of your life, and lots of people know different bits. Some people know that you're original founder of Red Letter Days, some people will know you from the BBC Dragon's Den series, some people know you from your business mentoring, some people know you now more from the soulpreneur type of work that you're doing with Source TV, and hopefully you'll say a little bit about that. But I was thinking a little bit about the very first business, and that thing about flow is in that, isn't it? Because it's a business that's giving people a lot of value, and it's exchange, it's fun also. I'm curious to know, when you first went into business, were you mindful about wanting to run a business that where money also had a purpose to it and had value to it? It wasn't just about making money. Was that energy flow an important part of it back then?
Well, I was really passionate about business. I'd grown up above my dad's business, and I kind of knew one day I wanted to do my own thing. And I also loved giving. I was a real gift giver. I used to spend a lot of time creating gifts for people. And so when I first created Red Letter Days, it was really from this passion of wanting to create amazing experience-based gifts. So actually it was from a passion to serve. And the interesting thing, if I look back, when the whole business collapsed, because we built it up from nothing to 18 million turnover, if I look back, the key switch was when we switched from wanting to create great stuff into let's make money, let's make some serious money, let's drive turnover, let's take it to 50 million, let's float it. So actually there was a big shift in energy.
Isn't that interesting? Well, that's fascinating, because lots of people think, isn't it, when it comes to business, you've got to start out with the money bit in view, you've got to have that in mind, and you've got to be very money focused. Whereas what you're saying is actually the passion, the service. If that's not there, then actually things can go awry. And I should say we're in a busy restaurant and so on, so there will be noise and all the joy of people in here. So that's fascinating, isn't it? Do you think that if it's purely just about the money, it is likely to fall apart?
Well, I think the starting point for a great business is when you want to create something amazing, whether that's amazing products or services or experiences. But then the other really key thing is to put a business model behind it. And that's where a lot of people actually fall down. And they're giving great stuff, but they haven't thought through the business model. But it's actually the giving that comes first and the business model that kind of underpins it. And you've really got to have those two. And I'm noticing this especially in that kind of whole soulpreneur space. A lot of people working from their kind of higher chakras, connected to source, heart-centered, speaking their truth, doing a lot of intuitive work, but not rooted into the material realm, manifestation.
Yeah.
And if you've got the top half working without that bottom root, it's actually, you're doing great work, but you're not actually making any money. And I meet a lot of kind of very penniless solopreneurs who are really struggling around money because they haven't underpinned all that great giving work with a great business model.
I think that's so true, and I think there's a number of elements to this I'm keen to kind of explore, and I suspect people watching this are going to be manifold. I suspect there are going to be people who are in business, and many of the people that you talk about, the solopreneur, the healers, the therapists, and so on. I suspect there'll also just be people who are just curious about money in their day-to-day lives. Fascinating when you said that you grew up. And your father, did you say it was a shop? Would you say you literally lived? Did you say you literally lived above the shop? Am I making that up?
No. We lived above the shop. So I spent a lot of my childhood down watching my father giving great service. It was an electrical shop, so people would come in with weird baby-like fittings and ask for help. And it was a really great learning of, he was just so patient, happy to give advice. He had everything in stock. And then finally, at the end of the transaction, people would always buy something, and I would be the one who actually wrote it in the book. And didn't get emotional now. Thank you. Counted out the change, and so I got a really powerful link very early on between this wonderful giving service and this reward.
Well, this is wonderful.
It was like a sort of Pavlov's dogs thing, that sort of psychology of giving great stuff. Get a little reward. And even now, like if I open my PayPal account and someone's, just bought something for £8 or something, it's just like, oh wow, a sale. It's like a little kind of reward. And I think that is the real. It's actually quite addictive business in that sense, giving great stuff and getting reward.
And I like that way that you're talking about, that you touched on a few times, it's the flow, it's that sometimes people struggle because they're not in the cycle of it, so they're either giving, and there's not the receiving.
Yeah.
And I remember
they just want to take.
Or they just want to take.
Without thinking about what can I give. And people in a place of desperation about money fall into that trap. I've got to make some money. How can I take? How can I make? And that is energetically a disaster because you really go into a very negative energy space where it's very difficult to manifest.
And what you're saying here is extraordinary because we're here in the heart of London. I've always loved Mayfair actually because I always feel as though energetically it's got a lovely energy to it. I feel as though it's kind of very at peace with itself. You go to other places and that energy isn't so much the case. I wondered when you were saying that and you talked about how lots of people who are, I guess, disrespectful of the energy or money and they're either taking it, I guess, at either level of society. Do you have a take overall as a society as to where we are in terms of our relationship to money? Because I know that sometimes when I watch things on Twitter, you're somebody who's got lots of, you seem to be somebody who feels strongly about lots of things.
Well, I think it's really interesting that we have made money the bad guy and we've made the rich people the bad guys. And I think as a society we have almost demonised anyone who's wealthy and it's like a bad thing. And most people who are in that energy of resentment and jealousy and anger around money, it's very difficult to manifest money. And one of my great mantras is love money, fall in love with money, not just receiving it, but spending it, really admiring people who have managed to attract it and really, wanting to find out more. What made them so successful? And usually, most people, 99% of very wealthy people, have done it through giving amazing service, products, experiences en masse to millions of people.
Right.
Obviously, there's always a few people who got their money through abuse of power and, negative energy. But usually karma sorts those people out, like the banks. Karma sorts those people out. But the majority of people who are very wealthy have done it through giving great service, and I just really wish that we could admire that because it's entrepreneurs who've created the great changes in our society, not governments. It's people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and the guys who founded Twitter and the innocent guys. And all of these amazing shifts in society have been driven by entrepreneurs.
Well, I'm really fascinated by this, and it's in a way it's lovely to hear you say that because I'm curious to know in the tough times in business, and you've known tough times as much as anybody else, what were the learning lessons for you? Do you feel as though for entrepreneurs, that some of those entrepreneurs and some of that you've talked about even perhaps, that there are lessons that one needs to learn on that money journey? Because I would imagine all sorts of things can happen. I started off in media and I was a singer and performer. And when I was a singer and performer, I wanted to do the ego, meaning the stars, all of that kind of stuff, and it didn't happen. And one of the things I'm glad about that didn't happen is I really had to learn to be empathetic, to really understand people, to understand what the music and all that stuff that was really about. And I'm glad in a way I didn't make it. So then when it came on to me being a speaker and as a coach, I really understood, including those people who had made it or were wanting to make it and all of those ups and downs. Do you think that there are some of the learnings potentially therefore when entrepreneurs have the ups and downs that they should learn that will make sure that they focus on the service and what you're talking about?
Well, I think the big trap about business and money is that you are always on a trajectory to that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Right, yes.
And the problem with living like that is that you're always thinking, when I get rich, or when I get the big house, that's when I'll be happy. And I've really learned from my journey that true prosperity is a bit like breathing, in the sense that you should be just as comfortable on that out-breath when there's no air in your lungs as you are on the in-breath when the lungs are full. Because to me, money is flow, and it is like the tide coming in and the tide going out. And the thing is, I think if you live by the sea and then you looked out, the tide would go out, there's no water, you can easily panic and say, oh my God, where's the water gone? But actually, it's the same with money. There are times when the tide goes out in life, and there are times when the tide comes in, and we can get comfortable with that flow. In the sense of being totally comfortable when you have no money because you're so confident in your ability to flow money. To me, that's true freedom. And I think if you can be in that space, you can then really have fun. You can really have fun with money and playing the game of business, because it is a game, like you're saying about Mayfair. Playing Monopoly when I was younger, that advanced to Mayfair card that you get, which sometimes can be brilliant, advanced to Mayfair, and you get to buy it. But other times, if someone else has got a hotel on there, it's the worst card in the pack, right? So being able to live with the yin and yang, the in-breath, the out-breath.
And that's fascinating what you're saying there. I just thought there's something, as you were saying, that felt really refreshing. If one can be comfortable in the moments when it's not there. It makes me think a little bit about sport. A true champion, it will be the losses. It will be the games that they don't want to lose ever. But that's what really tells the champion. Their back is against the wall and they just trust in their own abilities. And I think there's something that you're saying there that's very, very powerful, that one's got to just trust, I guess, in one's own self, that one has a worth and therefore one can create something of worth. And unless one's comfortable in that space, there is a disconnect. It's not coming from the right space energetically. So I just love the draws that the links that you make between the actual energy and the actual money. I guess, do you feel as though we are so far removed often from the root of business and I guess what trade is about? I love the fact that because when you were growing up, you knew literally business was about service. Somebody comes in the shop, they buy something, they get something wonderful, they give some money in return. There's that lovely flow. And of course traders, one person grows chickens, the other person bakes bread, and the other person does plays music, the other person's a carpenter. And there's that natural exchange. And all the things that you're saying are naturally true. We have different gifts and so on. Do you feel it's a partly because we're so far removed from remembering that it's just about that actual exchange? One person's got this and the other person's got that. And I remember you had something in mind for the story that you do in some of your workshops where you'll get people to pass around, let's say, a £10 note, or you talked about how once you saw a £10 note go from here to here to here in that exchange.
And that's the thing, money, currency means to flow. That's the original root of the word. And so the thing about the economy at the moment is just that money's slowed down. It's a bit like musical chairs. No one wants to get out of their chair and dance around the room because they're too frightened of losing their place on the chair. And that's what's happened, is that there's a lot of fear around money in this current economy. And the problem with being in fear is that you're in a kind of very kind of closed, constricted place, which is very low energy. And so when you can move into a place of total faith around money, about your total confidence in your ability to flow it, because you know, ultimately, if you've got a tribe, all you need to do is just create great products and content for them, and just constantly be thinking of how can I create more great value? What brilliant events can I put on? What content can I create for my tribe this month? You know, what do they need? How can I serve? And you're working from that place, you can always monetize.
Well, that's what's fascinating. I think that, and I think you put your finger on something that's so important here, and we touched on it before, but sometimes when people are on that business journey, in all of the things that they think about, I need to do this and I need to do that, fun enough, that actually creating something of real service that people actually need actually comes secondary, if it in fact comes at all. It doesn't it? That sometimes there's such a focus on money that think about what is really going to be great for people, what are people going to really enjoy, what do people to actually need. We know it. We know it academically, but sometimes in all of that, maybe the fear and all of that stuff, or I should be marketing this way, I should be doing that way, that actual thing of actually serving people is lost. Because I agree with you completely. I think there are times where I actually step back in my business and I actually think, well, okay, who are my different clients? What is it they actually need? What's going on with them? How can I actually dialogue with them? How can I actually have a conversation with them about where they actually are and what it is that they actually need? Magic happens, because suddenly a flow thing that you're saying happens, because there's more conversation, there's more interaction, there's more understanding. Whereas when I'm just trying to project what they want or to try and manipulate, it's problematic.
The thing is, there's so many elements to get right when you're doing marketing. So you know, there's the price point, you know, there's the content, there's the packaging, there's the messaging, there's the whole target customer. There's so many elements that, and I've experienced this in marketing, you can change one tiny thing and suddenly it sells, and then but it didn't sell before.
Right.
And so getting to that magic formula is the real trick.
Right.
So quite often it's very easy to create something and go da and try and market it and you get no response and you give up. You think, oh my god, no one wants me, no one wants it, you know, I'm a failure, and you go into that negative loop as opposed to finding out what worked, what didn't, and even better, as you say, creating your products in response to demand and asking your customers, what do you need from me? How can I serve you? And then feed back exactly what they want back to them at the price point they want, on the date they want, you know, the solution that they want. This is all based on making others, putting other people's needs.
And what's interesting that I loved when you were walking through that you reminded us actually in a way what marketing should actually be about. It's almost as though sometimes I often say that sometimes people put the packaging before the product. You know, they're so focused on the packaging that actually, do you actually have a product that people actually will want in that actual box that you're doing? You know, the box might be fantastic and you've got all the bells, whistles and the lights, but actually it's the product in there, right? And I love then how you were talking about that therefore means that therefore the marketing and all those things around it then will be apt for the product rather than trying to manipulate it.
The marketing starts at the beginning of the process. Seth Godin's a great teacher on this, is that most people tend to create something and then market it at the end of the process. But actually building your marketing into product creation and into actually doing that at the front end, thinking through what is it people really want, what's really going to turn them on, what price point is really going to work for them, and knowing your customers specifically who are saying that. It's so important to do that work right at the beginning, because then it's easy to sell or promote whatever you've created. So many people do it the other way around. They go away, spend ages creating this amazing thing, and then almost like in private, wheel it out, and then wonder why no one wants it, you know?
Quite right. I'm just fascinated, before we close, and I could literally sit here speaking to you about this topic for ages and ages, because I just find that I think there's a richness and authenticity of understanding practically in real terms, and I can so understand the journey that you've been on because it's so authentic to the journey that you were on from very early on. So I think that it actually sits very naturally with you. You know how sometimes it's a bit like anything that somebody's good at. With some people, it just sits with them because they've had an understanding, they've lived with the piano their whole life, or they've worked with wood or whatever it might well be their whole life. I'm curious to know from your point of view, for the person who has grown up perhaps with a negative relationship to money. Perhaps they grew up without money, or people being told that money is a bad thing, that many people are. And perhaps they're struggling, and perhaps business is the furthest thing from their mind. They're just trying to get a job, or what have you, or that they're just struggling. are there any very baseline kind of tips that you would say to the person who just really seems to struggle with it, or it just falls out of their hands? I know it's a very big question, but are there any things that you would invite that person to look at that might just help them practically arrive at a better energetic place and a better energetic place with money?
I definitely think it's worth looking at your relationship with money, because if you have got, I mean, there's a great little technique by Morgana Ray. She talks about the money monster. If you've got this money monster, this negative relationship with money, if you've got that going on, no matter what you're trying to do, it would be so difficult for you to make money. So really looking at all your energetic relationship with money. How are you feeling? You know, how do you feel when you're having to pay that bill or spend the money, or when you have to let go of the cash? And how do you feel when you receive it? And how do you feel about rich people? How do you feel when you walk through Mayfair? Really noticing what's going on is that awareness is the very first point. Why do I feel like that?
Right.
You know?
And then you say,
where's my resentment coming from? Where's my anger coming from? Because if you can get to the heart of that, and sometimes just shining a light on it is enough to shift that energy, and really starting to fall in love with money, really starting to love paying your bills, love. I mean, I very rarely take kind of discounts and freebies on people. I always say, no, I insist, I must pay you, I want to come to your event. I could easily leverage freebies, but it's very important to honour people's value, because when you honour others' value, the universe honours yours, you know. So I think having that beautiful relationship with money, where you're using money as a beautiful gift in the world, and that is very powerful.
Well, and I love the way that you're saying that, because I think that value is such a lovely word, isn't it? Because it takes us to that self. Do I value myself? And do I value others? And do I value what they're doing? And therefore, I like the fact that you mentioned, you know, how do I feel when I'm paying a bill? And I actually, for example, I'm a big fan of paying bills and things very, very quickly. And you know, I feel good actually when I pay a bill straight away.
People don't expect it. But you do buy a lot of goodwill when you instantly show up with money. And I have some clients like that. They instantly show up with money. And you know, those people, I just naturally will go to the ends of the earth for, because I'm just like, they really value me. And that is a beautiful way to use money to really generate that kind of goodwill in the world.
And I'm curious then, Rachel, at the other side, those people who have money. And I think that one of the reasons why, of all people I could interview about this, I was really fascinated to speak to you, because I know that you've walked with people all ends of this particular kind of spectrum, and you understand what it's about. You work with top entrepreneurs, you know, people who are very, very successful. You know lots of people who have been building their businesses or struggling. Some of the people that we talked about before, who perhaps have had a negative relationship, they really struggle in terms of money. What would be your tip for those people who perhaps in a way are in or around money? Because one of the things that I discover is that sometimes energetically what can happen with some people in and around money, because the whole thing is that they have felt very low self-esteem, no matter what level of success they get, they still don't feel worthy. They're still trying to desperately grab onto money. So again, they haven't learned some of the lessons that you're talking about, or it's still a competition, because whilst they've got 50 million, somebody also they might know is a billionaire or what have you. And then all the stuff that you said about where sometimes people are holding tight to money, or that they're perhaps manipulative, that we touched on, can sometimes spill through personally or in terms of businesses that they run and so on. What would be your tip for people who have money? And I guess some people who have money aren't even aware they're holding it so tight. Any tips for them in the same way that you gave the tips for the people who are struggling with money? What tips could be there for the person who has money and perhaps their consciousness isn't open and awake? Again, that's a broad question.
Well, I said earlier about this kind of working from higher chakras and not working from the lower ones. There's an awful lot of people who are working purely from the base chakras, who are very driven by power, money, desire, ego, who haven't yet connected to source. You get the opposite thing happening, where you've got people who've got a lot of money who are really unfulfilled because they aren't working from the heart, they're not speaking their truth, they're saying whatever's needed to get the money, but they're not actually living from their truth. They're not tuned in and they're not connected to source.
And often their health really, I've experienced that often their health is one of the first markers whereby, and relationships and so on, but often their health, because the energy is really
The
trapped.
thing is that in that third dimensional material realm, the highest energy is money, right? And in the fourth dimensional higher realm, the highest energy is love. So if you're very much in the material realm, very focused on money, you can often be very, very rich, but you haven't got the love. And to me, that's a very poor person.
Yes.
So it's how do you align all of your chakras? And I think this is the consciousness we're moving into, where people recognise it's not enough to be material realm, because there's something more. But then also, at the other end of the spectrum, it's not enough just to live in that kind of fourth dimensional world without the earth root. And I think if we can align all of our chakras to get that connection to source and be able to earth it into prosperity, because prosperity is not just about for you, because if you're prosperous, you can flow it to others. In that beautiful giving and rewarding value and spreading that wealth in the world. And that to me is a really beautiful. Everyone worked from that space. What an amazing.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that it's interesting. You know, sometimes when we talk about economies, about growth and growth about the economy and prosperity and so on, I think what's really interesting about what you described there is often that the definition of it is narrow. It's not as expansive. And so if one thing that's always struck me, if we're purely looking at things in economic terms, we know that there's going to be, it's a bit like you're saying all the time, there's always going to be boom and bust. That I remember from my economics. So actually, we need the kind of prosperity that is far more rounded and far more sustainable. And that comes from the far more conscious way of what are all the different ways in which I can serve. Because sometimes it may well be about things that financially go up in value, but sometimes it might be about other types of growth or insight or enablement and so on. So I think what you're saying, I think there's an invitation in what you're saying for those people who have money, who are creating. As it's interesting, a couple of people that you mentioned before, it's interesting the journey that some people who have a lot of wealth go on. You talked about the Bill Gates and so on. Sometimes as the consciousness builds, be it from somebody else, another entrepreneur, then suddenly the things that they're doing with their money or the things that they're doing with their time or with their energy or with their influence really is about improving the fabric of society in the ways that and is that what you're thinking about, that we will see if people become more awake to...
But I think ultimately this is where we're moving towards, where people are doing business and enterprise because it's a vehicle for their passion and their great work in the world, and they're putting the business model behind it so that they can get into prosperity around doing heart-centered work, so they are true soulpreneurs. And I just think that is a very beautiful space where people really are in flow, and there's so many tools out there and ways that you can get into flow through your passion and your work and your desire to serve in the world.
But I think the key thing is what you said there. I like the fact that you brought it back to the passion, somebody's real passions and their real talents, so on, because I think if somebody does go on that journey to discover and allow themselves, what is it actually my passion, what is it I'm really good at,
what's my great gift?
It's really hard not to create something joyfully and to share it joyfully and for people to appreciate it joyfully. It's really difficult to be out of sync when one does that.
And I'll tell you what I call this, Rasheed, and I've really got this with this whole law of attraction thing, and why people find it so difficult to manifest is because they're always trying to manifest from a place of lack. But if you're in that, what I call Ace of Cups energy, which is like a cup overflowing with desire to serve and passion for what you do, because you really want to give it. When you're in that place of abundance internally, because you love what you do so much, you just can't help but create great stuff in the world. It's very easy to manifest when you're in that abundant, overflowing Ace of Cups type energy.
Well, I think you put your finger on it, because I think that very often when people talk about things like law of attraction and so on, there's still this disconnect, because there's me here and there's the world out there, but when they realise actually I'm of the world, I'm part and parcel of it, and I have this joy for it, I love what I do, I love serving others, and I loved it, then suddenly there is that fluidity, because we know that we're not worried when the tide goes out, because we're part of the rhythm of the tide.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Rachel, I want to thank you so much. It's been such a joy. I just knew that when I knew I wanted to do this interview, I just knew that you were the person who would just bring a lovely richness of dimensions, and that's what you've done with this. You brought a number of different dimensions to it, from the very pragmatic, okay, what are my practical relationships, as well as business, where a lot of money obviously springs from, and then also this more spiritual awareness, but in a very understandable, tangible way. So I just want to thank you so much, and all the work that you're doing on the fascinating journey that you're on. And I'm always an onlooker from the outside, fascinated on the work that you're showing, because I think it's the entrepreneurs like yourself who are on that consciousness journey themselves, who are therefore impacting on the rest of us in and around business, that is so important. So thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. Thank you very much. A real pleasure. Take care. I'm going to turn off the camera, so I'm going to leave you to smile. Thank you very much.